Mason Pike, the foreman, closed his binder slowly and looked past me toward Elaine. The excavator had gone quiet, but its engine still ticked as it cooled. Beyond it, the 6 fallen peach trees lay at uneven angles across the row, their leaves trembling whenever the breeze moved through the orchard. The exposed irrigation line hissed into the dirt beside one stump. I asked Mason to keep the page open while I photographed it. He held the binder flat against the hood of his truck. The original route was a clean blue line running north along the utility strip on the Willow Ridge side. The red addition broke west at the last bend, crossed the fence, and continued between my trees. There was no engineer's stamp beside the change, no revision date in the title block, and no initials from the county. Elaine stepped between my phone and the page. "You have what you need. The crew is going back to work." I lowered the phone without arguing. Then I asked Mason whether he was willing to operate machinery on a route that did not match the permit displayed in his excavator. He rubbed a thumb along the binder's edge. "Not until somebody clears this up." Elaine's expression tightened. She told him the HOA was his client and that every hour of delay would come out of his contract. Mason did not answer. He walked to the excavator, removed the key, and slipped it into his pocket. I turned back to the damage. My boot sank into loose gravel where irrigation water had begun pooling beneath the new path. The crew had cut the fence panel at both posts instead of removing its bolts. Tire tracks crossed the drip manifolds, and one of the painted stakes stood within 3 feet of a tree that was still upright. I photographed each object from wide, medium, and close angles, then recorded a slow video showing the path from the broken fence to the last mound of gravel. I placed orange cones outside the disturbed ground, marking the damage without touching the crew's machinery or claiming that I had authority to close the site. I called my insurance agent only to document the time and condition, not to ask her to decide responsibility. Then I left a message for a property attorney I had used during a farm equipment lease. I also texted my orchard manager, Luis Ortega, and told him to shut off the western irrigation zone before the leak washed more soil from the roots. Elaine remained beside the waiting golf carts, speaking into her phone. 10 minutes later, she handed me a printed notice bearing the Willow Ridge logo. It described the project as an approved emergency access and recreational connector. At the bottom, one sentence warned that interference could make the responsible property owner liable for delay charges. I photographed the notice in her hand before accepting it. My name was nowhere on the permit page attached behind it. Neither was my parcel number. Mason waited until Elaine walked toward the clubhouse before approaching me again. He kept his voice low and pointed to the red turn on the field plan. "That wasn't in our original bid packet," he said. "They added it after the route had already been approved. The red line mattered because the western rows were not spare ground. My parents had planted the first peach trees there 31 years earlier, when Ward Orchard was still surrounded by hayfields. I was 54 now, and I had spent most of my adult life replacing weak trees, improving drainage, and balancing varieties so they bloomed close enough together for reliable pollination. The 6 trees on the ground were 17 years old. They produced heavily, shaded the shallow irrigation line, and helped anchor a row that fed directly into our packing schedule. They were also booked into a late August wholesale order with a regional grocer. Replacing them meant more than buying saplings. New trees would need years to reach comparable production, while the empty spaces would alter irrigation pressure and harvesting patterns immediately. I could estimate the loss, but I could not make a 17-year-old tree reappear before the next season. Willow Ridge came much later. Its first homes appeared beyond our eastern boundary, 11 years before the excavator arrived. The developer installed a clubhouse, walking paths, and a narrow utility strip along the subdivision's edge. None of that land touched the western peach row. My family had never joined the HOA, paid its dues, or signed an access agreement. Our address was reached from the county road on the south side through a farm gate the association did not maintain. Luis arrived in his dusty pickup and walked the damaged area with me. He had managed our harvest crews for 9 seasons and knew the irrigation layout better than anyone. After shutting down the western valve, he uncovered 2 crushed manifolds and a split feeder line under the gravel. Water had already softened the ground around the roots of the nearest surviving tree. If they compacted this entire strip, "We may lose more than the 6 they cut," he said. I marked the wet areas on an orchard map and wrote down the meter reading. We also photographed the severed fence posts with a measuring tape beside each cut. The opening was 14 feet wide. From the fence to the last gravel pile, the new lane extended roughly 380 feet through my parcel. By late afternoon, Elaine's printed notice had been followed by an email from the HOA's management account. It called the project a safety connector for golf carts and small emergency vehicles. The email claimed Willow Ridge possessed access rights under a utility and maintenance easement shown on the community planning map. It ordered me not to move the stakes or block the construction zone, and repeated the warning about delay costs. The language sounded official, but the attachment was not a deed or recorded easement. It was a colored marketing map from the subdivision's early development. A dashed green line passed near the orchard, labeled Future Connection. It had no recording number, legal description, dimensions, or signatures from my parents. I pulled our deed and title policy from the fireproof cabinet in my office. The deed described all 32 acres through bearings, distances, and monument references. It listed a power line easement near the eastern boundary and a narrow drainage reservation beside the county road. Nothing granted Willow Ridge, its residents, or its golf carts a path through the western rows. That did not mean I could declare the dispute over. Deeds had to be compared with recorded plats, prior instruments, and the physical monuments on the ground. I made copies and placed the originals back in the cabinet. Then I created a folder containing Elaine's notice, the HOA email, my photographs, Luis's irrigation notes, and the video of the stopped machinery. Mason called before sunset. He gave me his company's project number and confirmed that his estimator had priced the route shown in blue along Willow Ridge's utility strip. The red turn had arrived in a replacement field packet 4 days before construction. He had assumed the HOA had secured whatever additional permission it needed. "Nobody told us we were entering a separate parcel," he said. After the call, I checked the legal description again. One monument reference matched an old iron pin near the broken fence, but I had not seen it since the surrounding grass thickened that spring. If that pin remained where the deed said it should be, it could establish precisely how far the new lane crossed onto my land. The next morning, I called a certified surveyor and asked her to locate every relevant boundary monument before anyone moved another stake. Nadia Brooks arrived 2 days later with a robotic total station, a metal detector, and a copy of my deed already marked with notes. She was 44, direct without being abrupt, and careful about separating what she could locate from what a court might ultimately decide. Before unloading anything, she walked the lane with me and asked which stakes belonged to the contractor. I pointed out the white wooden stakes bearing the permit number in black marker. Nadia photographed them but did not use them as boundary evidence. She began with the monument references in the deed and the recorded plat for the parcel that had later become Willow Ridge. The old iron pin near the broken fence was still there, buried beneath 4 inches of grass and packed soil. Her detector found it less than a foot from where the deed calls placed it. A second monument near the southern farm gate and a capped rod along the eastern boundary allowed her to test the line from both directions. By mid-afternoon, the instrument had established what the physical damage already suggested. The gravel lane sat entirely inside my parcel. At its deepest point, its center line was 38 feet west of the boundary. Nadia then located the utility strip shown on Willow Ridge's plat. It ran north beside the subdivision, separated from my peach rows by almost 200 yards of HOA common land. The approved path could have followed that corridor without crossing my fence. "A survey locates the descriptions and monuments," she told me. "It doesn't invent an easement that isn't in the records." That distinction became important the next morning at the county development office. I requested the complete permit file using Mason's project number. The clerk provided the application, drainage notes, inspection checklist, and stamped site plan. Every page identified the eastern utility strip. The plan showed a 10-foot golf cart path with a small culvert at the northern drainage swale. No approved sheet crossed my parcel, and the file contained no change request. I ordered a certified copy rather than relying on photographs from my phone. While it was being prepared, I placed Mason's field plan photograph beside the county version. The blue route, labels, and revision box matched. Only the red pencil turn differed. It left the approved corridor before the culvert, crossed the common land, and entered the orchard through the fence opening. The print date in the lower corner was 4 days before construction, exactly as Mason had said. The county clerk checked the permit log and found no submission on that date. She would not speculate about who drew the line, but she confirmed that inspectors had never reviewed it. Back at the orchard, arborist Daniel Cho examined the stumps and the 2 surviving trees closest to the gravel. He measured trunk diameters, photographed torn roots, and reviewed our harvest records. The 6 removed trees could not be replaced at their prior maturity. He also warned that compaction and excess water had stressed the neighboring root zones. His preliminary recommendation included careful gravel removal, soil aeration, irrigation reconstruction, and monitoring through the next growing season. That afternoon I met Rachel Kim, the property attorney whose call I had returned after the excavation. I gave her the deed, title policy, certified permit file, Nadia's preliminary survey, HOA notices, photographs, video, and Mason's project information. She arranged the documents by date before offering an opinion. The planning map, she explained, might show what the developer once hoped to build, but it did not by itself grant Willow Ridge a right across my land. She wanted a full title search before making any final claim. More urgently, the HOA needed notice that all construction and use of the disputed lane had to stop while the records were reviewed. Rachel ordered a title report and copies of recorded instruments referenced in the parcel's chains of title. That search mattered because an older easement could exist outside the papers in my cabinet. Until the examiner finished, she would not claim no right existed. She would claim what the evidence already supported. The HOA had built outside its permitted corridor and across my surveyed boundary. Rachel sent a cease and desist and evidence preservation letter that evening. It demanded that Willow Ridge halt work, prevent golf cart traffic, preserve emails and meeting records, and identify every document supporting its claimed access right. She attached the certified permit plan and Nadia's marked boundary exhibit. Elaine answered through the HOA's management company the following afternoon. She did not address the different routes. Instead, she repeated that Willow Ridge held broad utility and maintenance rights and accused me of interfering with a safety improvement. She promised that the board's attorney would provide supporting documents. None arrived. At 9 on Saturday morning, I heard electric motors beyond the broken fence. 3 golf carts rolled onto the unfinished gravel lane, carrying residents toward the clubhouse as if Rachel's letter had never been sent. I stood beside the broken fence and recorded the carts as they crossed. The first driver slowed when he saw me, but the 2 behind him kept moving. Their tires pressed fresh tracks into the damp gravel, and pale dust lifted around the lowest branches. I did not step into the lane. Rachel had been clear that my safest response was to document the use, protect the undamaged trees, and let the written notice speak for itself. I kept a log of every cart, time, direction, and driver. The pattern showed the lane was being used for convenience, not an isolated emergency that required immediate access through the orchard. The carts returned 20 minutes later. One veered around a puddle and rolled over an exposed irrigation coupling Luis had flagged with orange paint. The plastic fitting snapped with a dry crack. Water began spreading beneath the gravel again before we could close the valve. Luis and I installed a temporary bypass outside the disturbed strip. It kept water flowing to the remaining trees, but pressure dropped across 3 rows. We began irrigating in shorter sections, moving valves by hand before sunrise and again after sunset. Work that had once taken a single control change now required hours of attention during the hottest week of the month. By noon, Willow Ridge residents had received an email signed by Elaine. A copy reached me through a homeowner who bought fruit from our roadside stand. It described the lane as a permitted emergency connector and said one neighboring landowner was attempting to obstruct a safety project over a private disagreement. It did not mention the certified permit route, Nadia's survey, or the cease and desist letter. The message changed the atmosphere quickly. 2 residents drove to my farm gate and asked why I was blocking ambulance access. Another posted a photograph of my orange cones with a caption accusing me of holding up a community improvement. I answered neither online. I sent the email and screenshots to Rachel, then asked the residents at the gate to direct legal questions to the HOA board. On Monday morning, a pickup towing a plate compactor stopped beside the orchard. 2 workers began unloading bundles of plastic edging. They were subcontractors Mason had not used during the excavation. I photographed the truck, license plate, and company name before telling the supervisor that ownership and permit disputes had been placed in writing. He called Elaine. Minutes later, she arrived in a golf cart carrying another copy of the HOA notice. She insisted the crew had authority to finish the surface before the lane deteriorated. The supervisor asked to see a survey or written access agreement. Elaine handed him the community planning map. He studied it, looked at the peach trees, and told his workers to reload the equipment. Mason arrived shortly afterward, not to continue construction but to retrieve temporary barriers his company had left near the eastern route. He brought a copy of his daily work log. The entry from 4 days before construction recorded a call from Elaine approving a field adjustment to avoid the drainage swale. Another note said the client would provide owner authorization for any off-corridor entry. Mason had never received that authorization. He also forwarded the change invoice his office had sent Willow Ridge. The description read, "Western Orchard Shortcut, including reduced culvert work and shortened grading." The credit was substantial enough to explain the choice. Shifting the route would save the HOA nearly $38,000, compared with building the drainage improvements required along the permitted corridor. Rachel asked Mason to preserve the original electronic file, email headers, and any messages attached to the change. He agreed, though he made clear that his own company expected to be blamed for entering the wrong parcel. Rachel told him she was not offering immunity or deciding responsibility. She wanted the complete change showing who knew what before the excavator crossed the fence. The HOA's archived meeting minutes added another layer. 3 months earlier, the board had discussed rising culvert and grading costs on the eastern route. Elaine proposed seeking alternatives before the summer golf cart event. The minutes recorded no vote approving a new alignment, no negotiation with me, and no authorization to enter Ward Orchard. One board member, Thomas Bell, called me that evening. He sounded embarrassed rather than angry. Elaine had shown the board the same marketing map she later sent me, and described the western edge as an unused buffer. Thomas assumed the HOA already controlled it. He had never seen my deed, the county permit, or a request for an easement. "If she knew it was your parcel, she never told us," he said. Rachel now had evidence of continued use after notice. A second damaged irrigation fitting, the change invoice, Mason's work log, and meeting minutes that contradicted Elaine's claim of board approval. She prepared a complaint seeking declaratory and injunctive relief, along with compensation for the property damage. Because the title review was still being completed, she framed each claim around the records already verified, rather than pretending every possible easement question had been resolved. Willow Ridge announced that Friday's community golf cart rally would include a ceremonial opening of the new connector. At 4 o'clock Thursday afternoon, Rachel filed our request for temporary relief and attached the video of those first 3 carts entering the orchard after the cease and desist letter. Rachel received the court's response shortly after 8 on Friday morning. The judge did not decide ownership from the emergency papers. Instead, the court entered an interim order preventing further construction and use of the disputed lane until both sides could appear. Willow Ridge had to notify residents that the ceremonial opening was canceled and that golf carts were not to enter the orchard. By 10, 2 signs stood at the clubhouse end of the lane. They said route closed pending review. Elaine did not come to my property, but the HOA's attorney filed a response that afternoon. It relied on the community planning map, broad maintenance language from Willow Ridge's declaration, and the argument that the connector served a public safety function. It also suggested the boundary remained uncertain because the association had not yet reviewed Nadia's fieldwork. Rachel answered with Nadia's signed survey and the certified permit file. She emphasized that the HOA declaration governed Willow Ridge property and its members. It did not automatically burden a separate parcel. She still avoided claiming that one document alone settled every legal question. The court set an evidentiary hearing 3 weeks later and authorized a limited exchange of records concerning title, permitting, route selection, and construction instructions. The completed title report arrived the following Monday. The examiner had traced both parcels through the recorded instruments referenced in their chains of title. The power line easement and county road drainage reservation appeared where my deed placed them. No express easement granted Willow Ridge recreational, emergency, maintenance, or golf cart access through the western orchard. The old developer map had never been recorded as an instrument against my parcel. That eliminated the HOA's documentary claim, but Rachel continued checking whether it might raise another theory, such as prior use or necessity. The facts did not fit those theories. Willow Ridge had direct access to every facility through its internal streets, and the permitted eastern corridor remained available. The orchard lane was shorter and cheaper, not necessary. The records produced by Willow Ridge explained why convenience had become urgency. An engineering estimate from 4 months earlier priced the required culvert, drainage stone, and grading on the permitted eastern route. The board had budgeted too little. Delaying the project would also push its opening beyond the summer rally Elaine had promoted to residents. In an email to the treasurer, Elaine proposed cutting west before the drainage swale and using the orchard edge. She wrote that the change could avoid approximately $38,000 in drainage and grading expenses. The treasurer replied that the board would need property owner permission and a permit revision before authorizing construction. Elaine's response came 12 minutes later. She said the project purpose had not changed, the same permit number could remain in the field packet, and the western strip appeared as a future connection on the planning map. She instructed the manager to have the contractor price the shortcut while she handled board notice. No request to me followed. No revised plan went to the county. Another email showed Thomas Bell asking whether the western strip belonged to Willow Ridge. Elaine answered that it functioned as a buffer and that legal descriptions did not need to delay field adjustments. Thomas did not approve the route. He asked for clarification at the next meeting, but the topic never appeared on the agenda. Mason's electronic records matched the sequence. His estimator received the altered drawing from the HOA manager, along with a message saying owner coordination was being handled by the client. File metadata showed the red turn had been added after the county-stamped plan was scanned. Mason acknowledged that his company should have required written access before mobilizing beyond the permitted corridor. His admission did not erase the contractor's role, but it authenticated how the altered sheet reached the excavator. While Rachel organized the records, Daniel Cho and an irrigation contractor completed their damage assessments. Replacing 6 trees, accounting for lost production during establishment, treating the 2 stressed survivors, repairing the feeder line and manifolds, removing gravel carefully, restoring compacted soil, and rebuilding the fence, produced a preliminary property loss figure of $36,100. Nadia's survey, Daniel's evaluation, soil testing, and related professional expenses added another $4,500. Legal costs were tracked separately because any recovery would depend on the claims, court authority, or a negotiated agreement. The orchard continued operating around the case. Luis and I adjusted irrigation before dawn, documented declining pressure, and kept harvest trucks away from the damaged row. Each practical inconvenience went into a dated log. We did not inflate it into a claim for the entire farm. We recorded only labor, repair costs, reduced yield, and work directly connected to the unauthorized lane. Inside Willow Ridge, the board began to fracture. Thomas and 2 other directors requested a special meeting after reading Elaine's emails. They voted to appoint independent counsel for the association and suspended any further spending on the shortcut. Elaine remained president, but she no longer controlled every communication leaving the board. 2 days before the hearing, the HOA offered to remove the loose gravel if I released all remaining claims. Rachel declined. Removal without a restoration plan could tear more roots, and the offer said nothing about the permit deviation, destroyed trees, damaged irrigation, or future access. On the evening before the hearing, Rachel arranged the evidence across her conference table: deed, title report, recorded plat, certified survey, permit file, altered plan, photographs, work log, invoice, emails, minutes, and damage reports. Nothing on that table was magical by itself. Together, The documents told one continuous story about how an approved eastern route had become an unauthorized shortcut through my orchard. The hearing room was smaller than I expected. There was no jury, no dramatic gallery, and no instant ruling on every issue. The purpose was narrower, whether the interim restrictions should remain while the ownership, access, and damage claims moved forward. Rachel had warned me that the judge would focus on verified records, the likelihood of success, and the risk of further harm. Willow Ridge's attorney began with the association's best argument. He said the connector had appeared on planning materials for years, served residents rather than a private developer, and could accommodate small emergency vehicles. He described the route change as an adjustment within a broader community access plan. According to him, the HOA had relied on its declaration, historical maps, and the contractor's understanding that permission had been resolved. The argument gave Elaine a reason for wanting the path, but not a recorded right to place it in my orchard. Rachel started with the land records. She introduced my deed, the title report, and the recorded Willow Ridge plat through their certified copies and supporting testimony. The deed described Ward Orchard without a Willow Ridge access easement. The subdivision declaration applied to HOA property and member lots. The plat located the common land utility strip east of my boundary. Nadia then explained her survey. She described the monuments she recovered, the measurements she checked, and the methods she used to reconcile the deed calls with the physical evidence. She never claimed that a survey alone decided title. She testified that the gravel lane was physically located inside my described parcel, with its center line reaching 38 feet west of the surveyed boundary. The HOA attorney questioned whether the old iron pin could have shifted over time. Nadia answered by explaining how she verified the line using 2 additional monuments and the recorded plat. Moving one point would not explain why all 3 independent controls aligned. Next came the permit. The county records custodian authenticated the application, stamped site plan, drainage notes, and revision log. The approved path followed the eastern utility strip and required a culvert at the drainage swale. No filed revision redirected it through Ward Orchard. The red pencil turn on Mason's field sheet was not present anywhere in the county file. Mason identified that sheet. He described receiving the replacement packet, Elaine's approval of the field adjustment, and the assurance that the client would handle owner coordination. He acknowledged that his company mobilized without seeing written permission. When the HOA attorney suggested Mason had independently selected the route, Rachel showed him the change invoice. Mason confirmed that his office created it after receiving the altered plan from the HOA manager. The invoice connected the physical route to the financial decision. The engineering estimate showed that the permitted path required additional drainage and grading. Elaine's email proposed the orchard shortcut as a way to avoid approximately $38,000 in costs. The treasurer's warning about permission and a permit revision came before construction. Elaine's answer said the existing permit number could remain because the project purpose had not changed. When Elaine testified, she maintained that she believed the planning map showed a usable connection. She said she had relied on staff and contractors to manage technical details. Rachel did not accuse her of forging the county permit. She asked narrower questions: whether Elaine had received the treasurer's warning, whether she had contacted me, whether the board had voted on the western route, and whether anyone had submitted a revision to the county. Elaine admitted receiving the warning. She could identify no request sent to me, no approving board vote, and no permit revision. She still called the change a field adjustment, but the documents established that the adjustment crossed separate property and avoided work required on the approved route. The court left the no-use restriction in place. The judge found that I had shown a strong likelihood of establishing that the HOA lacked a recorded access right through the orchard and had constructed outside the permitted corridor. Continued traffic risked additional root, soil, and irrigation damage that money alone might not fully repair. The ruling was preliminary, not a final judgment, but it prevented Willow Ridge from treating the lane as completed while the case continued. Elaine passed without speaking. Thomas stopped beside Rachel and asked for a copy of the written order as soon as it was entered. His request mattered because the board, not Elaine, would now have to decide whether to defend the shortcut or begin repairing the damage its records documented. The judge also encouraged structured mediation. By then, the HOA's independent counsel had reviewed the same documents and understood that prolonging the dispute would increase restoration and legal costs. Rachel and I entered mediation with 3 requirements: a recorded acknowledgement that Willow Ridge held no access right through the orchard, a restoration plan supervised by qualified professionals, and compensation tied to documented loss rather than a dramatic round number. The first session lasted nearly 7 hours. Willow Ridge initially offered to remove the gravel and replace 6 trees. Daniel's report explained why that was incomplete. Saplings could be planted, but they would not immediately replace 17-year-old production. Soil had to be decompacted without tearing the roots of the 2 surviving trees. The irrigation system and fence also required reconstruction, and future monitoring had a measurable cost. Mason's company participated through separate counsel. Rather than forcing the parties to litigate allocation before any repair began, the final agreement allowed the HOA and contractor to resolve their contributions privately while remaining jointly responsible for completing the restoration obligations owed to me. The agreement did not make assumptions about insurance coverage. After a second session, we reached a written settlement. Willow Ridge agreed to pay $58,600. The amount consisted of $36,100 for tree loss, reduced production, irrigation, fence, gravel removal, and soil restoration, $4,500 for the survey, arborist, testing, and related professional work, and an $18,000 negotiated contribution toward legal expenses. The HOA also agreed to record a document confirming that no recreational, maintenance, emergency connector, or golf cart easement crossed Ward Orchard. It could not enter the parcel again without my written agreement or a separate lawful right established through proper process. Restoration would follow Daniel's recommendations, with Nadia marking the boundary before equipment returned. The court would retain authority to enforce the settlement until the work was completed. 3 days after we signed, a dump trailer backed carefully toward the broken fence. This time, Nadia's stakes marked the limit. Daniel stood beside the surviving trees, and I held a copy of the restoration plan. The first bucket lifted unauthorized gravel from the orchard and carried it back across the boundary. Removing the gravel took 4 days. The crew used a small vacuum excavator near the surviving trees and hand tools wherever Daniel believed roots might be close to the surface. Nadia checked the boundary each morning, and Luis watched every section of irrigation uncovered beneath the lane. No machine crossed beyond the marked restoration area. Once the gravel was gone, the soil looked pale and pressed flat compared with the dark ground between the undamaged rows. The restoration contractor loosened it in shallow stages, added organic material approved by Daniel, and rebuilt the grade so water moved away from the trunks instead of pooling around them. The split feeder line and 2 crushed manifolds were replaced before we tested the western zone under full pressure. The fence came next. New posts were set along Nadia's surveyed line, using the original bolt pattern at the removable panel. 6 young peach trees went into the openings left by the destroyed row. They looked almost fragile beside the mature trees, but their varieties matched our pollination plan, and the settlement funded monitoring through the following growing season. The $58,600 payment arrived according to the agreement. I used the restoration portion for the orchard rather than treating it as a windfall. The reduced production calculation helped cover the years before the new trees could bear comparable fruit. The professional cost reimbursement paid bills that would never have existed if the HOA had followed its permitted route. The settlement did not restore the lost seasons, but it gave the orchard resources to recover without borrowing against the next harvest. Willow Ridge eventually built its golf cart path along the eastern utility strip. The board secured updated contractor pricing, completed the required drainage work, and scheduled county inspections before opening it. The route was longer and less convenient than the shortcut, but it remained on HOA-controlled land and followed the plan in the permit file. The recorded no-access agreement appeared in the county index several weeks later. Rachel sent me a certified copy, which I stored beside the deed and Nadia's survey. I kept Mason's altered field sheet in the same folder. The The red pencil turn was a useful reminder that a line drawn for convenience did not become a property right simply because someone attached an official permit number to it. Willow Ridge members received the internal emails during the board's review. Elaine resigned before the next annual meeting. Thomas became interim president, but he never asked me to celebrate the change or excuse the board's failures. He sent a short written acknowledgement of the damage and confirmed that future projects touching neighboring property would require title review and written permission before bids were issued. By early fall, grass had begun covering the restored strip outside the tree basins. The two stressed survivors held their leaves, and Daniel believed both had a reasonable chance of recovery. Luis and I still checked them more often than the others, especially after irrigation cycles. One evening I stood beside the replanted row while the western valve opened. Water moved through the repaired line with a low, steady rush. No motors crossed the fence. No gravel shifted beneath my boots. There were 6 empty years of growth ahead of those young trees, but the ground beneath them belonged to the orchard again.